A top story this hour, Eskom unions are expected to present a joint response tomorrow morning to Eskom management's offer of 4.7 wage increase. The utility proposed a 4.7% pay hike for the 2018-19 financial year during the resumption of wage talks earlier today. NUMSA says Eskom further proposed that all other demands such as housing allowance and benefits will remain unchanged. Unions allege that Eskom failed to honor a resolution taken by Minister of Public Enterprise Pravin Gordhan in a meeting with unions. They argued that Friday's meeting made this a fundamental condition for the resumption of talks. And today's negotiations were held between Eskom, the National Union of Mine Workers, National Union of Metal Workers South Africa, and Solidarity. The unions would not confirm what the final response will be.
We're putting a position on behalf of NUMSA, NUM, and Solidarity. We have been here since this morning. I must say we have not been happy in that we would have met with the Minister of Public Enterprise, who basically put negotiations back on track. And there were a couple of issues that were agreed upon, which I will not repeat. I will just state one of those things, that this process that we're in is a very serious process, in that we wanted delegations, both from Eskom board, Eskom management, senior leadership of unions to be part of this process. And we define this as powered delegations for a purpose of a better word. And I think we were extremely disappointed by what rather appeared to be Eskom management and the board not taking this process very serious. There's nothing special about them. We simply want them to be part of a process so that they can enable this process of negotiations to arrive on the resolve of what we're going through.
And joining us on the phone line is COSATU President Dumo Dlamini. Welcome, Dumo.
Thanks very much and good evening to your viewers. Thanks for having us.
And also on the line is Pagamile Hlubi, spokesperson for NUMSA. Good evening, Pagamile. Okay, I guess we'll start with you, Dumo. What is your perspective on the results of the discussions as announced today?
Well, firstly,
hello, Dumo, are you still there? It looks like we've lost Dumo for now. We'll get him back as soon as we can to continue our discussion on the discussions between the unions and Eskom regarding the ongoing protests relating to the wage issue at Eskom.
There was an announcement also by the power utility that there is a probability of load shedding, and Harold, that we hope this will be resolved, because especially in winter there is a higher demand for electricity. They did warn consumers to use electricity sparingly, but that is very little consolation if we do not know what the outcomes were of the reopening of the negotiations between Eskom and the various unions. And I think just as the energy security, Harold, in that if you look in recent years, we sort of had a break, if you will, from the Prince of Darkness, or what used to be called as Eskom. So with the president of COSATU, Dumo Dlamini, you can perhaps continue and see if there is a level of stability that we can enjoy going forward.
Mr. Dumo, welcome back again. Going back to the question that I asked originally, what do you make of the discussions today and the outcomes? What should we look forward to going forward?
we think that it was a better day, that now workers or the negotiators are taking something to their members, what has been put on the table, because they have all the time to take mandates from their members. And we hope that this time around, these negotiations will be held in good faith, in spite of the challenges that are reported to have happened early in the day, and want to encourage all parties to take these negotiations very, very serious. The whole country is looking up to what is going to be the solution, and COSATU is behind all those workers.
And of course, for a lot of people at home, one of the big worries is the issue of load shedding, which we've had to deal with over the last week or so.
Yes, indeed, and we should state up front that whatever happens with that issue, workers should not carry the blame about it. And we've heard on a number of occasions workers saying we are not about to sabotage the country. So if employers create situations that the country could be plunged into trouble, they should not push the blame to the workers. And as Kosatu, as I've said, we are monitoring very closely these negotiations and call for all the parties to continue to behave in a responsible manner to ensure that the country can be saved.
As we understand it, the next step would be for the union leaders to now take the outcomes of today's discussions to their members. What if the members reject them?
Look, a mandating or taking mandates from members is the correct practice for negotiators and leaders of unions, because we get mandates from workers, and these negotiations are reminding us of that very, very great value of worker control, where members must be consulted. Let's respect that and hear what workers say about what has been put on the table, and we will insist again. And happy that this time around they did not come back with a zero offer. They've put that 4.7 and the other issues on the table. Let members decide what they want to do.
But of course, I mean, what we're dealing with here is one issue relating to the situation at Eskom, which is the issue relating to wages. There are bigger issues at stake. There's the question of what happens with Eskom going forward, long-term, the sustainability of the organization. Are there substantive discussions going on while the discussions around wages are continuing?
We have in the meeting that we held last week with the Minister of Public Enterprises indicated that we would want to have a discussion outside these wage negotiations on the future of Eskom, because we wouldn't want a situation where whatever change or rationalization or restructuring that must happen to happen at the expense of the workers, but also to happen at the behest of Eskom being sold to private parties, which is what we are opposed to. So, but we're looking forward to those negotiations when they happen with government.
Just picking up on the issue of privatization and maybe more generally liberalization of the energy market. If I look back a few years back, maybe more than a few years back, at the telecoms market in the 90s, we were in a similar situation, perhaps not to the same extent, but you know, there was this conundrum around telecom, which ultimately resulted in the liberalization of the telecoms market. And I think most people would agree that bar for a few issues that are still of concern, by and large, that process was quite successful. Telecom became sustainable, call costs did come down substantially. What is so different about the energy market that we cannot replicate that experience?
Firstly, I wouldn't agree that having reduced the total workforce of Telkom from 66,000 to about less than 15,000 today, and the dissipation of what used to be traditionally the way Telkom operated and creating jobs at the time. And now you have many sockets of privatized entities of Eskom, of Telkom, and we say that is progress. There may be profits being made, but at what expense? We have lost the shareholding as government of Telkom. We're now at the behest of the private sector, and you can see when you go to those centers which are supposedly expected to be delivering the services, the misery that those who work there are experiencing. So that in its own should have been handled differently. Telkom is now almost all privatized. And for us, that's not a good thing. Even to consider that for Eskom would be a disaster that we should prevent. Eskom must deal with the issues of the bloated senior management, which is taking a lot of money. Eskom must deal with the issues of what should we do about the energy mix in this country, other than a situation where government willy-nilly implements IPPs without any negotiations. We must avoid job losses at Eskom. We must avoid the total sale of Eskom just because we are facing a crisis. It's not a solution.
Then there's also the issue recently, NERSA granting Eskom permission to recoup some revenue.
Yes.
I think 33 billion rands in total. Are you comfortable with that? I know some of the labor unions were opposed to those increases in tariffs. Are you comfortable with that?
Look, everybody knows that there are billions and billions of rands that are held by municipalities. And our failure as government to recoup, or as government entities in municipalities to pay back Eskom is one major failure. The NERSA intervention for us will not get us into a permanent or a long-term solution of the challenge. If the systems there in government, but also at Eskom, are unable to galvanize more revenue for Eskom in a manner that can sustain the organization, the systems have got to change.
Yeah, I mean, and that's a fair point. I mean, we've had revenue increases before, or tariff increases rather, and in the last few years, we've seen that some of those tariff increases didn't really lead to a commensurate increase in revenue. So it's almost like something that's defeating itself. The more the tariffs go up, the less demand there is for electricity, and you almost end up going backwards anyway.
That's correct, because this is always passed to the consumer, you and me. And we tend to be subsidizing or cushioning big spenders like mines and other areas who are paying less, and there is no appetite by government to really go for those that have the capacity to pay and sustain Eskom. But instead, the consumer who consumes electricity as individuals in this country, we have to carry the burden through taxes, through the high prices of electricity in the country. Now, we don't think that is a good thing to happen, and that is not a way to go.
Then, of course, under the current circumstances, we know that Eskom is quite heavily indebted. It's got, what, 370 billion rands in debt, which is something like 200% of its equity. It's astronomically large in debt terms, and there's doubts about whether Eskom has actually got the financial wherewithal to meet the requirements of servicing this debt. That of course then places a burden on the national fiscus, which is also quite indebted itself. I mean, I think our interest cost as a in terms of our national budget in 2 years is projected to go to more than 200 billion rands. So we're obviously now in a situation where Eskom has to become sustainable quite quickly and not have to require support from Treasury, or at least not a lot of support from Treasury. But that means we're in a bit of a squeeze here. What is the solution? Because
we have allowed the damage to perpetuate itself for a very, very long time. One. Two, we have put ourselves at the behest of other people living outside the country on how we must run our business. They dictate on what must happen. Can I just quickly tell you that when the new interim board was appointed, we were told that this was done so that the investors are going to be more friendly to us in as far as bailing out Telkom through borrowing. This doesn't seem to happen, and we cannot blame workers for this. We cannot blame society for this. We can but blame management and government for failure to ensure that there was no looting at Eskom to ensure that you have a management that is equal the size. How do you have 400 senior managers to supervise the work and 47,000 workers? It means each supervisor is in charge of about 115 workers. It's ridiculous, and you're spending a lot of money. Those are the things that we must quickly look to if we want quick fix solution. But long term, what should be the model? And it's not privatization, but what should be the model that has an Eskom that is sustainable? How does South Africa venture into an energy mix that allows us to have a security of supply of electricity in this country, whilst you have an Eskom that is able to perform her functions?
Thank you very much, Dumo, for your time.
Thank you, sir.
Over to you.